Man, and when you know it, I completely missed out on having this active while I started the show. But it is Friday. It is April 10th, 2020. And all you heard was, or all you missed was me talking on and on and on about stuff that is kind of COVID related. And I don't really want to talk about that on the show, but of course it's permanently in my brain because it's in fucking everything else too. But anyway, I've gone ahead and thrown down some first dance, and it was Body Count Institutionalized 2014 here on Coin Metal. And that was Skindred with Machine. And so, as far as what we're going to get into today, got all kinds of tabs open in the old browser, so we're probably going to touch on multiple subjects until we land on something really juicy. But the first thing I got up here is on Coindesk.com. This is by Michael Casey. So yes, penis. Money is a shared fiction. Our mechanism for storing and exchanging agreed upon units of value, a tool so powerful that wars are fought over it, springs entirely from our collective imagination. Oh my God. Somebody's actually recognizing that. Some might find that unnerving. The age-old desire to attach currency's value to something earthly, precious, and finite is partially founded on a false hope that these tokens in which we place such faith have intrinsic value. It is understandable, it's an understandable instinct, and there's strong gold standard argument for curtailing the sovereign's power to debase people's savings. But the sense of innate value is just a belief. As with people's beliefs in other ephemeral concepts, in religion, for example, or in the concept of a nation, the ones most difficult to challenge are those fundamental to society. Indeed, one could argue that if everyone were to acknowledge that money is a fiction, it would cease to function. That's not entirely true. You're reading Money Reimagined, a weekly look at the technological, economic, and social events and trends that are redefining our relationship with money and transforming the global financial system. And we're not going to subscribe to it. The imaginary nature of money is not a weakness, however, it's a strength. As Israeli historian Yuval Harari, author of the seminal Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind, explains, our capacity to conceive of and commonly believe in stories is the primary reason why we humans rule the earth, instead of, say, the chimpanzees. It's what enabled us to organize into communities and ultimately to build civilization. The modern world is a direct outcome of our capacity not just to imagine, but to imagine together. Now, as a terrifying pandemic, it's not terrifying, dude. How terrifying is it called? Forces a retreat from globalization and challenges the foundations of the international capitalist order, society could be in for one of its periodic narrative shifts, a sweeping reimagining of its core tenets. Our idea of money, which Harari describes as, quote, the most successful story ever invented and told by humans, could experience the most significant transformation of all. Our money narrative was already gearing up for a new act even before an omnipresent antagonist called COVID-19 was added to the cast of characters. That's because an intense competition was underway to establish a programmable standard for digital currencies. Actually, no, Michael. That has never been the race. The competition here is to establish freedom from a monetary monopoly that has ruled the planet for at least the last century. It has nothing to do with, publishing programmable standard for digital currencies. No. Not a programmable standard of jack shit. Multiple standards of digital currencies. That is the future, my friend. The radical new model will replace banknotes and with what author David Birch calls, quote, e-cash, and enable software commands within a device-driven peer-to-peer system of value exchange that bypasses gatekeeping banks. Not really. Nonetheless, there will be fierce competition to establish dominant standards across multiple alternatives. No, there won't. It's a diverse field encompassing decentralized, standalone currencies such as Bitcoin, decentralized, algorithmically managed, quote, stable coins. No, they're not decentralized. DAI, reserve-backed stable coins built on open permissionless blockchains such as Circle and Coinbase. They're not permissionless. Circle is not permissionless, and Coinbase is not permissionless either. Paxos and Tether, neither one of those. Those are built on top of like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Continuing on here. New privately defined stablecoins built on permissioned blockchains such as Facebook and Libra, or Facebook's Libra, and last but not least, central bank digital currencies such as China's digital currency electronic payment system. The stakes in this battle are high. On the line are the balance of geopolitical power and public versus private boundaries of our economies, and the value we place on transactional privacy. The pandemic has given this all-in game even more urgency. Not really. As central banks flood the world with monetary stimulus, setting the stage for a more familiar currency war, in which countries weaponize foreign exchange depreciation to give their industries an advantage over others, the dollar-centric international monetary system will come under stress. The Federal Reserve cannot indefinitely be the world's leader of last resort for everything and everyone, not without undermining its independence and threatening global confidence in American leadership. Meanwhile, the fallout from the crisis and the response to it have highlighted use cases for digital currencies that weren't previously on people's radars. Who would have thought, even as recently as February, that a digital dollar proposal would make its way into a March congressional bill as lawmakers grappled with how to get relief money directly and quickly into Americans' hands. Meanwhile, fears over virus contagion appear to have accelerated the case for cashlessness as warnings rise over, quote, germy money, and countries go so far as to burn or disinfect notes. So yes, a reimagining is coming, hence the choice of title for this brand new newsletter. Tell me about this Bitcoin thing. In this section, we'll employ data visualizations to explore how money is being reimagined. What better place to start than with CoinDesk's own metrics on the content journey people take to understand cryptocurrency. In this case, we were interested to know whether, despite Bitcoin's sharp sell-off during the first COVID-19 hit to financial markets, people are seeking to learn more about it in these uncertain times. So we queried Google Analytics on page views for our Bitcoin 101 page. The result this past Wednesday, the page reached its highest daily view number since CoinDesk.com's new site was launched mid-November. Here's its activity since March. Ooh, nice appreciable gain. These data signals are preliminary, but along with a late March spike in visits to Nick Custodio's 2014 CoinDesk piece entitled "Still Don't Get Bitcoin? Here's an explanation even a 5-year-old will understand." They hint that the chaos of the pandemic is reviving interest in crypto among CoinDesk's discovery audience. This is nothing like newcomer visits we saw during the 2017 crypto bubble. So far, greed rather than fear seems the bigger drive of mainstream curiosity. But while it's painful to think of large-scale adoption hinges on an event as horrible as this, perhaps people are this time motivated by deeper, more lasting interests. Maybe they're asking about decentralized governance, data integrity, privacy, whether Bitcoin is truly digital gold, not simply how do I make a quick buck. Reimagining money is a collective exercise. There is no single author to the narrative, so this newsletter will necessarily incorporate other voices. Here's an unscientific survey of relevant stories and ideas. The Global Town Hall. What a difference a year makes. The Switzerland-based Bank for International Settlements, BIS, which provides banking services to central banks and issues research reports and policy recommendations, has gone from dismissing CBDCs as pointless to all-out advocacy. In March last year, BIS chief Augustin Carstens said central banks were, quote, not seeing the value in the technology, but in August, notably, following digital currency announcements from Facebook's Libra and the People's Bank of China, he said CBDCs would be coming, quote, sooner than we think. At that time, the BIS formed its innovation hub and 5 months later named Benoit Courier, a former heavy hitter on the European Central Bank's executive board, as its leader. Come January, it released a survey of 66 central banks, finding that 80% were studying digital currencies and 10% were close to issuing them. Now, per a April 3rd bulletin, BIS researchers have pronounced that people's changing relationship with cash during the COVID-19 pandemic would further accelerate the rollout. Oh God! And just in time with the 5G rollout that happens to be happening while we're all off the streets. How interesting, right? How to explain a centuries-in-the-making monetary shift to your grandmother? Conveying this complex concept to the world at large requires combining big scholarly thinking with accessible, easy-to-digest content. So, it's pleasing to see the conversation diving into this topic, backed by an international alliance of universities. The site lives up to its, quote, academic rigor, journalistic flair tagline. A December 12th piece entitled, quote, when China and other big countries launch cryptocurrencies, it will kick off a global revolution, remains highly relevant and readable, even though it preceded COVID-19. Its author, Liang Xiao of Lund University, writes, quote, while technological change has been incredibly fast in the information era, the system of international payments has lagged behind. But once sovereign digital currencies started taking off, this will suddenly change. Just like smartphones quickly eliminated most old cell phones, no countries will be able to reject blockchain payments for long. That's bullshit. How will the world's 1.7 billion unbanked fare during COVID-19 lockdowns? Now that virtually all commerce has moved online, people without access to bank accounts are especially vulnerable. Not really. Actually, they're probably less vulnerable now than they've ever been, because now you've eliminated all the ties that they can get to it. It's kind of relieved them of any necessity to interact with it. Continuing on. As Aaron Klein of the Brookings Institute notes, quote, there's a big problem for the coronavirus economy. The internet doesn't take cash. The challenge the challenge is not just in Africa, Latin America, or Asia. It's in the U.S., where 1 in 14 households are without a banking account, according to the FDIC. Such families use prepaid cards, which charge high transaction and balance checking fees and require them to pre-position funds, whereas those of us with credit cards don't have to. With millions suddenly thrust into unemployment and already struggling to get access to food, the cost of an outdated pre-digital world of finance are about to become even more burdensome for the poor. It's for them that this revolution must be fought. The currency Cold War, cash and cryptography, hash rates and hegemony. Slated for release in May, this book is about as timely as it can get. David Birch, a prolific author on topics of money and identity, and a consultant and prominent speaker on the fintech circuit, has delivered a detailed, rich analysis of the global competition to define electronic money and what it means for our lives. Disclosure, I wrote the book's foreword, outlining the convergence of cryptography, smartphone technology, identity authentication tools, and digital assets. The Currency Cold War is an indispensable guide to the future of money. By the way, Dave will discuss these topics during our Consensus Distributed virtual event on Monday, May 11th, when he'll join our leading thinkers, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. Well, I think this is kind of faulty in that there's a lot of assumptions there. You know, for one thing, it assumes that any such entity like the BIS is actually going to be defining money for us in the future. And I think Bitcoin is a real testament to the fact that that's no longer the case. It's not even central banks. It's not even entities like Facebook or Google that are going to be defining it for us. It's people like you. And I think that's probably the scariest part for a lot of people. And you know, I remember looking into that abyss myself, that very abyss. And I came out on the other side understanding that it's not just me that defines what money is. It is just me who defines what money is for me. And this is the dynamic of money that I think that most people take for granted, is that they rely on other people to assume the value for them. And the problem with that is that eventually you end up with an entity like the Federal Reserve who does that for a significant percentage of the planet, and not always fairly or in their best interests. You know, and because it's not being decided in your best interest, you have to assume that they're going to probably be deciding in their own best interest first. I mean, because they're in it to make money too. They're not loaning all that money out just to loan money out. They're loaning it out to make money on the money. It's an investment, right? So rather than establishing the monetary value within their system, you have now the alternative of Bitcoin. And this is something that's really lost in conversations like this. Is that, you know, they talk about like Facebook's coin and they talk about Microsoft's coin and all that coin, but they don't talk about like Dogecoin. And the reason being is because it's not because Dogecoin can't function perfectly well. And it's not because Dogecoin can't do every single fucking thing that anything that the BIS or the Federal Reserve or the U.S. government or the U.S. Treasury could issue you in the stead of the U.S. dollars in your pocket. It's not because of any of that. It's because of their interests. They're directing according to their interests, not your interest. And that's something that you need to be taking into account for yourself. And really, like the people that have known this for a long time, they're people that are gold bugs, silver bugs, you know, people that do that make their money on money arbitrage, you know, where they're exchanging from euros to dollars or dollars to yen or euros to yen or whatever. That's where they make their money. They understand this relativity of monetary unit. And, so for them, things like regulatory arbitrage is not an odd concept at all, because they understand the differentials between the monetary jurisdictions depending on which nation you're in, which state you're in, so on and so forth. And so for them, when they look at the broad spectrum of currencies, and they include cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and other altcoins in that slew of alternatives that they're considering, they look at Bitcoin and they see that all of the jurisdictional issues that are faced by all of the other fiat currencies are not faced by Bitcoin on the monetary level. Within the Bitcoin network, it doesn't matter where the transaction comes from. It doesn't matter where the transaction is going to, as long as it's going from one wallet to another, directly. That's what happens. You start stashing it in like a multi-sig transaction. Well, then there's some stuff that can go on that's not necessarily a direct transaction between two people. If you're doing it on a payment channel, again, vast array of alternative outcomes can splay forth before you until that transaction actually closes and settles. And so again, this is the issues that we're running into with cryptocurrencies, is that people are advertising alternatives such as Lightning Network and all that as Bitcoin directly on the face, without informing you what's going on underneath, and that you could be having a much more direct relationship between you and your business partners using Bitcoin than the alternatives that they provide for you. And it's this level of autonomy that is really at stake. It's this ability to decide where you're going to be stashing your monetary value, what you're willing to transact in, what type of abuses and what type of monitoring you're willing to tolerate. And these are going to be what determine your value. They're going to be determining what's valuable to you. And if you're looking across the span and you're saying, well, I want a currency to transact in that doesn't have any kind of tax layer or any kind of little tax hooks, that when I do transactions that some other entity other than me and my business partner are making money on, and that's going to be ruling at least one defining characteristic of how you choose which currencies that you're transacting in. And again, this power, this autonomy, this level of autonomy and freedom has not been available to us for a long time. I mean, it has in certain ways. I mean, there's a lot of us that do a lot of barter transactions and stuff like that. And so we're kind of oriented with the idea of value and how to negotiate on an interpersonal level. It's not something that's typically taught, as part of the direct curriculum in school. I mean, you do debate and stuff like that, but there's a social aspect to value that is not really addressed as such in a lot of the school curriculum. I mean, you have to take a little bit more specialized courses to become oriented with that aspect of money and social value. Because we don't have these contexts kind of like inbred into our brain on a conscious level. I mean, we do to some extent. It's like how you manage to navigate through life without chopping your fingers off or walking down the wrong alley or something like that. I mean, it's that same process. Okay, but this is another little tool set that you can be using to try and secure yourself even more. And most specifically, your monetary future and freedom. And so again, it's against the interests of a lot of entities that write these articles for you to be understanding it in that kind of context. Personally, it's in my best interest for you to be as free as possible, because that means I can be as free as possible too. And I don't know. I look at the capabilities that technology give us, and I see the possibility for mutual outcomes. Mutually beneficial outcomes. Outcomes that, they achieve all of my goals and achieve your goals on top of it without discluding either one of us. Without discluding either of our interests. And I think that's really important to be considering, at this kind of turning point. We're running into an issue that's created by only a certain number of entities benefiting from any kind of situation. Where all of the value from all of our intellectual creations and all of our, toil on the shoulder and all that, that only a certain number of people are being allowed to benefit vastly at our expense, and people are getting disaffected and disinterested in it. It's like you got to look at the entities that are really being impacted, okay? And by and large, they really seem, to me at least, to be things that are optional. Things like travel. It is very, very optional in the age of email to travel. And with that in mind, the idea of having to make a lot of business trips seems kind of silly. And so you start making little cuts here and little cuts there, and your next door neighbor makes some little cuts here, little cuts there, and next thing you know, the number of people that are flying back and forth across the country is down by 30%. It was completely unforeseen by the airlines, and they weren't planning for it, and so they run into this big-ass divot in their budget because they're flying around a bunch of fucking empty planes because they were planning on having full planes, or at least semi-full planes, or at least full enough to be breaking even on their costs. And that's not happening. It hasn't been happening for at least a year. It's one of the reasons why when people want to blame it on COVID, I don't blame it on COVID at all. Because like I said, this has been going on where we've been running on vapor. Okay, where entities like the airlines, they've been kept afloat on loans that they haven't been able to pay back, and so the banks haven't been able to pay the loans that they're issued out. They're not making the profit back that the Federal Reserve expects when they're issuing them disbursements of funds. They are expecting a return on investment, and that's supposed to come from shit like you flying back and forth across the country. Well, if you're not doing it, the money isn't made from that. It's not returned to the airlines. The airline can't pay the bank can't pay back the Federal Reserve, and so the Federal Reserve has to start pumping money back into those banks just to cover the overnight. They're trying to carry them because they're expecting in maybe a month, maybe 2 months, they'll be making enough money that they'll make a profit on that investment. Because the airlines, of course, will have to raise their prices, and then they'll make their money back really quick with this massive jump in travel that everybody does. The problem with that is this. They've been pushing, and specifically over the last 2 months, to get a lot more stuff done via streaming. And we're already seeing where that's been an issue with Zoom, where you drive a whole bunch of eyeballs to Zoom, and that incentivizes people like bombing office meetings and shit like that. You raise the incentive to be disruptive, people will be disruptive. It's a game of incentives out there. But anyway, so again, when you're looking at it from those terms, you can see where another 30% of business travel, you can just knock it off because people will have gone to Google Groups, Zoom, Telegram, Discord, fucking Facebook, a billion other avenues to visually connect with one another. And they're going to be a little more sophisticated with using the internet to communicate with one another and start looking for alternatives to things like Google. And that might actually impact them negatively too. The whole interest pool the collective interest pool of the, I don't know, some 3-4 billion people that interact on the internet, maybe even more. The whole interest pool, where it's directed, what apps you're using, what web pages you're using, it's all ephemeral and temporary. And this is something that nobody really seems to get firmly enough in their mind. Facebook's managing to last, pardon me, a little bit longer than MySpace did. But even now they're facing significant competition with like Twitter and others. So you've got to look at it and start seeing that people are going to be directed, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years more and more to more decentralized, more independently focused alternatives. And so things like standalone communications apps, I think that's going to become popular again. They weren't 100% standalone, but they were a more disconnected and decentralized network than we have today with a lot of our like Netflix and stuff like that. I think that we're seeing where that interest pool is being diluted too. Where you've got so many of those fucking pay-per-view services, and like none of them have anything really good on, and they're getting less and less good stuff and more like mediocre stuff. So, I think there again we're going to see another shift where the capabilities to make movies have gone down to the average person, and where somebody's going to rediscover the art form and is going to put out something really significant, and people are going to be renewed in their interest in the film medium. But that's just because we're so visually stimulated. But like I said, I think that these shifts, you've got to consider them on a multidimensional level. And one of them that you always have to consider is the economic impact of the transition. If you're not having to move as much material because you're doing a lot of your transactions solely in a digital realm, well, you're cutting back the demand for shipping. And so, of course, that's going to drive up the cost of shipping because less stuff is being shipped. So again, these impacts are constantly changing. And right now, people are discovering more and more how the internet can make their lives more efficient. And as that's happening, we are seeing direct impacts in the physical market. I've been anticipating this for quite some time, and it's really surprised me that it took past 2016 for the transition that I've been seeing, over like maybe the last year, to become as intense as it is, because the actual investment required to be able to use multiple cryptocurrencies directly at a Walmart counter is no more sophisticated than like a 2014 desktop. That could manage it. That could host an interface that like connects with a bigger, mainframe. Maybe they're on, or I'm talking at a school there with the size of it, server. Okay, some sort of server directly on the location that's connecting to a broader network or whatever, but is hosting multiple blockchains so that you're able to transact in multiple different currencies. This change is going to happen. They've already made some of the physical change, but pretty damn soon they're going to understand that their interest is not in serving the making sure that the state gets their fucking cut of their commerce. Their interest is going to be keeping the motherfucking lights on. And if I can do that by transacting in Monero as well as US dollars, and not cutting any of the government entities like that into my transactions in Monero, then I'm going to fucking do it to keep the lights on. And I believe that kind of transition is coming, where we've already seen the exchange where we've seen an explosion of people doing things with cryptocurrencies, and the explosion of capabilities that's enabled. and the number of different currencies that are available and the new ones that will become available. We're going to also see changes in the number of people that are shipping things and the ways that they are shipping things. We are going to see changes in the people that are providing electricity and internet bandwidth as well. Because we're finding out that having certain interested parties doing these things for us is creating inefficiencies. Inefficiencies that do not need to exist and that cost us money that we do not need to be spending. And this transition is going to happen so fucking fast. The regulators are going to be looking at one another for another decade trying to figure out, is there possibly a universal framework that we could ever apply to this? And they're just going to sit there and say, no. The best we can do is pitch to as many of those different interest groups and monetary pockets as we possibly can to draw enough interest to certain implementations that we want that will create resistance, and then we'll create a market and so on and so forth. I mean, like, literally, that's going to be the way that they're going to have to do it. But it is going to be voluntary. And that's the differential between what we have today and what we will have tomorrow. And it is with that, I want to throw down a little more music. Man, I smoke way too much pot. And as far as where to go next, I think this one is kind of appropriate. Eye of the Beholder by Metallica, here on Coin Metal. And that was Probot with Big Sky. I don't know, there's something about that album, it always feels so unplanned and kind of impromptu. I don't know, there's something cool about that. And there's something to be said for those kind of collaboration projects where they just, get together and just jam it out. But given the caliber of the players, I think they could have planned just a little bit more for it. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw down with this thing. I got this PDF here. It's a BIS bulletin. This is the Bank of International Settlements. So yeah, it ought to be kind of interesting. COVID-19 Cash and the Future of Payments. And this is by Raphael Error, Giuliano Cornelli, and John Frost. Triple Penis. And this is authored April 3rd, 2020. BIS bulletins are written by staff members of the Bank of International Settlements and from time to time by other economists and are published by the bank. The papers are on subjects of topical interest and are technical in character. Views expressed in them are those of their authors and not necessarily the views of BIS. The authors would like to thank Hui Keo, Taijin Park, and Louisa Wagner for their support. This publication is available on the BIS website, www.bis.org. And so, yeah. COVID-19, Cash, and the Future of Payments. Key takeaways. Number 1. COVID-19 pandemic has fanned public concerns that the coronavirus could be transmitted by cash. Number 2, scientific evidence suggests that the possibility of transmission via banknotes is low when compared with other frequently touched objects such as credit card terminals or pin pads. Number 3, to bolster trust in cash, central banks are actively communicating, urging continued acceptance of cash and, in some instances, sterilizing or quarantining banknotes. Some encourage contactless payments. Number 4, looking ahead, developments could speed up the shift towards digital payments. This could open a divide in access to payments instruments, which could negatively impact unbanked and older consumers. The pandemic may amplify calls to defend the role of cash, but also calls for central bank digital currencies. Yeah, whatever. They're trying to exit cash during the time that they're crashing the value of it. So, continuing on. Viral transmission through banknotes and coins? The COVID-19 pandemic has led to unprecedented public concerns about viral transmission via cash. Central banks report a large increase in queries from the media on the safety of using cash. The number of internet searches pertaining to both cash and virus is at record highs. While search interest in these terms also rose in several East Asian and European countries during the 2009-2010 H1 pandemic, those statistics are dwarfed by the extent of recent searches. Graph 1 left-hand panel that we're not going to view. There are substantial cross-country differences in these concerns. Searches appear to be more prevalent where more small denomination banknotes, the type used for daily transactions, are in circulation relative to GDP. Overall, Australia, France, Singapore, Switzerland, Ireland, and United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States, Jamaica, and Kenya have had the highest recent search interest. And so it does show us neat little charts. The shaded areas in the left-hand panel, blah, blah, blah. Okay, data accessed on the 21st of March 2020, data resulting from worldwide Google search queries for selected terms in the period 2008 through current, indexed to 100 by peak search interest. Data accessed on 21st March 2020, data resulting from the average, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's just data points. Research in microbiology examines whether pathogenic agents, including viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites, can survive on banknotes and coins. Let's see. Angelakis and Thomas et al. Find that some viruses, including human flu, can persist for hours or days on banknotes, particularly when diluted in mucus. Let's see. Lopez finds that non-porous surfaces have higher transfer efficiency, meaning that they can transmit viruses and bacteria more readily. So don't stuff coins up your butt. The COVID-19 virus can also survive on surfaces. A study by Van Doremelin et al. 2020 finds that COVID-19 can persist for 3 hours in the air, 24 hours on cardboard, and even longer on hard surfaces. That said, scientists note that the probability of transmission via banknotes is low when compared with other frequently touched objects. To date, there are no known cases of COVID-19 transmission via banknotes or coins. Moreover, it is unclear if such transmission is material compared to person-to-person transmission or transmission through other objects or physical proximity. The fact that the virus survives best on non-porous materials such as plastic or stainless steel means that the debit or credit card terminals or PIN pads could transmit the virus too. The head of the German Public Health Institute notes that viral transmission through banknotes has no particular significance, as airborne droplets from infected individuals are the main infection risk. Moreover, experts note that washing hands after touching cash or other objects may help reduce the risk of transmission. Yeah, we already knew that one. Promoting trust in cash and universal acceptance. To To bolster trust in cash and guarantee universal acceptance, several central banks have actively communicated that risks are low and taken further actions. The Bank of England has noted that, quote, the risk posed by handling a polymer note is no greater than touching any other common surfaces such as handrails, doorknobs, or credit cards. And the source of that was the Bank of England. Bundesbank has advised the public that the risks of transmission through banknotes are minimal and that a sufficient supply of banknotes is guaranteed. The Bank of Canada has asked retailers to stop refusing cash payments, and that was quoted by O'Hara 2020. The South African Reserve Bank has counteracted scams by clarifying that there is no evidence of transmission by cash and it is not withdrawing cash from circulation. Other central banks have taken further measures. The People's Bank of China began in February to sterilize banknotes in regions affected by the virus. On March 6, the Fed confirmed that it was quarantining bills arriving from Asia prior to recirculation. Central banks in South Korea, Hungary, Kuwait, and other countries have also moved to sterilize or quarantine banknotes, and thus to ensure that cash leaving central bank currency centers does not carry pathogens. Central banks or governments in India, Indonesia, Georgia, and several other countries have encouraged cashless payments. Irrespective of whether concerns are justified or not, perceptions that cash could spread pathogens may change payment behavior by users and firms. In past crises, demand for cash has often increased as consumers have sought a stable store of value and medium of exchange. At the current juncture, data do not yet paint a uniform picture. In the United States, cash in circulation has recently increased, but in the United Kingdom, automated teller machines, ATM withdrawals, have fallen. In the medium term, the outbreak could, in principle, lead to both higher precautionary holdings of cash by consumers and a structural increase in the use of mobile, card, and online payments. These developments may differ across societies and between different consumers. Current developments bring digital payments to the fore, yet not all digital payments are immune. For instance, debit and cash card transactions generally require a signature or a PIN entry to a merchant-owned device for larger transactions. Countless card payments, which are popular in several countries, do not require a PIN for transactions. Recently, authorities, banks, and card networks in Germany, Hungary, Austria, Ireland, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere have set higher transaction limits for contactless payments. Let's see here. Let's see. UK finance, blah, blah, blah. Those are the reference points. Digital wallets or other smartphone-based payment interfaces, ergo stored credit card details or QR codes, where no physical contact of the same object by multiple persons take place, are further potential solutions. Online payments for e-commerce are, of course, not susceptible to viral transmission. A realistic assessment of the risks of transmission through cash is particularly important because there could be distributional consequences of any move away from cash. If cash is not generally accepted as a means of payment, this could open a payments divide between those with access to digital payments and those without. This in turn could have an especially severe impact on unbanked and older consumers. In London, one reporter, Herring 2020, has already noted difficulties of paying with cash and the consequences for the 1.3 million unbanked consumers in the United Kingdom. In many of the emerging market and developing economies where authorities have recently called for greater use of digital payments, access to such alternatives is far from universal. That's not true. This could remain an important debate going forward, potentially asking for a strengthened role of cash. Resilient and accessible central bank-operated payment infrastructures could quickly become more prominent, including retail central bank digital currencies. Such infrastructures would need to withstand a large range of shocks, including pandemics and cyber attacks. Auer and Bohm lay out potential architectures for resilient CBDC and technological options for allowing broad acceptability. In the context of the current crisis, CBDCs would in particular have to be designed allowing for access options for the unbanked, contact-free, technical interfaces suitable for the whole population. The pandemic may hence put calls for CBDCs into sharper focus, highlighting the value of having access to diverse means of payments and the need for any means of payments to be resilient against a broad range of threats. Let's see here. And so we just got a bunch of references from there on out. And so, yeah, I do agree with this in principle, but where I see some sort of failing in it is that they fail to recognize the importance of decentralized cryptocurrencies in this whole mix. And I think that's the biggest problem with entities like the BIS, is that they're dependent upon international entities for their funding. So, of course, they sing the tune, of entities such as governments, and they refer back to entities such as governments for their references. And the problem with that is that it's not giving you a full picture of what's going on with regard to the options that are available to you. If you knew that your necessity for what you would need to do in order to be able to digitally transact with people was to download a Dogecoin wallet and get some Dogecoin put into it, the whole mix changes. This whole idea of facilitating the unbanked suddenly becomes, can you access some sort of website that has a digital wallet for the cryptocurrency that people are willing to transact as money in your locality? If that answer is yes, you are suddenly banked. Or at least you're able to be your own bank in the absence of a bank that is willing or capable of serving your area. I think, again, they don't look at it that way because they look at money and transaction capabilities as something that's a service for them to be providing to other people, not something you can be doing completely on your own and outside of their purview. And, with regard to digital transactions, I'm sure they had it all sewn up at about 2005, 2006. They're like, oh yeah, man, we can just transition everybody over to credit cards. We can cancel out cash and everything will be fine. And then we saw a massive drop in trust with regard to the banks due to the actions of governments both in the United States and elsewhere with regard to bailing out people that fucked up in the way that they invested, and they were bailed out. Meanwhile, everybody else had to suck hind tit. And that's just not acceptable. It is not acceptable to have entities that no matter what, they win and you lose. Everybody has to be facing the same level of risk. And I think that's one of the aspects of cryptocurrencies that a lot of people want to dismiss. They want to talk about it in terms of quote-unquote blockchain. It doesn't tell you what network that is. It doesn't tell you what currency you're going to be transacting in. It just tells you that you're on a quote-unquote blockchain, a networked currency. Who runs the network? How much control do they have over your transactions? These are questions that are completely lost when we're talking about this technology in terms of quote-unquote blockchains, because we could be talking about a distributed database, we could be talking about a distributed network of independent ad hoc nodes. We don't know. And it's in somebody's best interest that you don't know. Well, that's one of the reasons why I do this show, is because I want you to know. And I want you to be able to arm yourself with what you learn on this show. And when those people tell you you have no choice but to transact in the way we tell you to, you say, no, that's not the way this thing's run, baby. And really, that's the kind of power that you have in your hands at this point. And, I just want to make sure that you're aware of it. You can only make the right choice if you're fully informed. and like I said, it's in a lot of entities' best interest that you not be fully informed. That you be making decisions on maybe 30% data. And the problem with that is you're always, most of the time you're going to be making the wrong decision, or at least not the best decision for you. And, and to me, that's just simply unacceptable, especially when, like I said before, it's not only possible for us to have a winner and a loser, it's possible for us to have multiple winners from one situation. Or one transaction, or, Like I said, I think that it's possible to be seeing to more than one interest group with the decisions that we're making, and I think that if we're transacting in different currencies, that it's going to be much easier to be feeling our independent and collective impact. And will. It's a lot harder to support wars when nobody is giving you money for war. I pointed this out to somebody the other day that, there's just been a major drop in the amount of quote-unquote terrorism going on out there. Most terrorism requires funding. Some of it you can get away with, like defaming stuff, or, like torching stuff. That's hard targets, are easy to hit that way. But things like sustained shelling campaigns, or insurgency warfare, or door-to-door interdictions, those all require funding, because it requires putting people up front. And even if it doesn't require putting people up front, it requires extending physical influence, which is things like bombers and jets, and all that stuff. It has a logistical demand, and it also has a financial demand. Even if you were to look at something like the thing that happened in Libya, and I'm not even going to label what happened in Libya, because there were so many different entities involved and so many different interests on the surface, at least, who were acting in concert and against one another, that it's really hard to really sort out and figure out exactly who was who or what was what. But all of it required funding. All of it required money. And it's the same thing with enforcement. When the interest is no longer in the hands of the people that have the money, the people that are pointing the guns, they go with the interest, not with the people holding the money. And I think this is a lesson that we're going to be quickly learning. Them farmers are going to become really prominent in their communities in the not so distant future. When they can't get a return on the outer market, they're going to be becoming more and more local with their supply. And I think that's going to cause a big shift in what we plant. Because we have this organizational structure set up so like there's this big ass demand for corn. Well, a lot of it is subsidized. And when those subsidies go away, those farmers are going to be looking to things like, what can I plant here to make the biggest return on my local market? Can I be planting things here in the ground that are giving me a much higher return than if I were to plant other things? And when they can say that about corn, and even when the subsidies aren't giving them enough, they're going to be shifting to those instead. Those other crops that they could be getting more money in their local market with. And those are the things that you can really rely on in situations of crises, is your local markets. Get to establishing them. And I think that's one of the bad things about the guidelines with regard to how many people should be able to gather in one area. You should be doing like open air markets right now with your neighbors. You should be establishing commerce connections with your neighbors, because that is your local market, kids. When you're not able to get all the way to town and back, you're going to have to be relying on the market around you. They're going to be your suppliers. They're going to be your demand. And what you can provide for them, well, it'll have varying levels of currency. How much what the exchange rates for them will be and what are. That's all relative. And so you got to be paying attention to what other people are growing, what other people are doing as far as work is concerned, people that are doing woodwork and whatnot. You watch your market. Pay attention to what you're capable of doing. And what you're not capable of doing but simply interested in, now is the time to be studying it. Because there's more than enough fucking resources available online to pretty much study anything you want to study, or anything you've ever been interested in studying. It's fucking available. And it's available to you in ways that it's never been available before. So, the whole excuse of, it's not available to me, I'm unbanked, that's all relative to whether or not you can get online, basically, and what your internet access is. And as sad as it is to say, we really haven't been paying as much attention to developing that as we should. But I think, again, that cryptocurrencies are going to kind of monetize that. We saw it in China, where when most of the hashing power shifted from America to China, that was a big deployment of hardware in China. They ran broadband out to little villages and shit that hardly had cell phone access before. So, when you when you look at the kind of development that caused to happen, I believe that same thing can happen in other places. That these scantily employed, scantily populated areas, if they do have some access to, say, a river that could be providing electricity, that those places are going to be more appealing than others. And how we develop them, I think we need to be paying attention to how nature operates as is, and trying to interdict as little as possible in it. Because one thing that nature does for us more than anything is provide food. Before it was grown in a farm or anything like that, it was freely roaming around. And after that, though, of course, there was people just like you that were growing their own shit, and you had enough room to do so. And if you don't now, you need to be getting in contact with people that do, and talk about things like sharecropping. Because again, I think your markets in the future are going to be a hell of a lot more local than they have been, despite the fact that we're going to be living in a far more globally connected age. And I know that's some sort of dichotomy, but the way that it sorts out, I think, is probably going to be different than any of the visions that we've had of a dystopian future where you have these mega corporations ruling everything. I think we're living in the dreck of that right now. We're shipping things to these one isolated sources is costing us in ways that we weren't able to see before. The replacement of our local markets and local shops with things like Walmart and Amazon, those have real impacts. But we're seeing where supplying those huge entities is having their own impacts and costs that far exceed the convenience that they provide. And when you have something like the internet, and you have something like air travel and drones and 3D printing and all that shit, the interface changes between where you need to be sourcing your items and who exactly needs to be involved in the transaction. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that I think a lot more of us are going to be designing things for ourselves and selling them for ourselves, and not really caring about trying to retain exclusive control over our intellectual property. People will be buying it from you because they want to support you. They want the royalties to go to the developer because the developer can then develop a better version of it. And they'll be depending on you to do that, because they're going to be too busy designing their own shit to manage designing the shit that you provide. I think that we're headed towards a future that's more akin to that than, mega corporations that are telling us what to do and telling us what to buy and shit. And I think product placement in the 21st century in like media and whatnot, it's going to look a hell of a lot different than it does now. I mean, you'll probably still have your Coca-Colas and stuff, but it's going to be a much more diverse market than it has been. And as a side effect of the lag and whatnot that we're witnessing now with having Walmart do all of our shopping for us beforehand. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down with some music. And I don't think I've played anything from Static X tonight. And, there's something wrong with that. Let's see here. Where'd it go? I want to play something off of Wisconsin Death Trip. Let's go with this one. Push It. Here on Coin Metal. And that was Within the Ruins with Elite. So, who's going to be the elite of tomorrow? Quite frankly, I think that after we rinse out the series of them that currently exist, that what classifies as elite and the number of them is going to change a lot. That the number of elite will go up a great deal, but what the standard of elite is will go down as it is distributed amongst us. So you never know. You could be the elite of tomorrow. It's not decided. And today it's probably less certain than it's ever been exactly who will shake out on top. But I think that we'll live to see it. That the market model for the future isn't all that far away from us, and I think it'll be far more diverse than it's ever been, and that it will span much farther than it ever has. That the networks of these currencies will be global in nature, and exactly who is involved and who is running them and who is dominant in them, these are all uncertain and will be constantly changing. And that is the dynamism that many people fear, because they fear that their own interests will be represented for a very short period of time. Well, the way to fix that is to align your interests with the most people that you possibly can. And that's never been greater. The possibility for that has never been greater than now. So it makes your job kind of easy, You don't have to get everybody to take your coin in your own locality, but if you can get some people in your locality to take a coin that is taken in other places, well, now you have a global market. And really, it's probably much easier now to do that than it ever has been before. And it is with that I'd like to close out this episode. Thank you very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so until then, I want y'all to trade safe. Do your homework. And watch out for your own bunghole, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And as far as our last dance is concerned, I have not picked one out, of course, because you just don't do that. But I think this one will be it. And so we'll go with a little bit of Sixth, because we have not played them tonight. And so here it is, part of the Friction, Last Dance, here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and y'all have an excellent evening, or excellent weekend rather. Good night.